evening on the West Coast. Good evening in the Central. Hey. Good evening on the East Coast. You know exactly who it is, family. Angela Nirvana, your hostess with the mostest on the Reparations Perspective, formerly Friends of ADOS TV. Boy, have I missed you guys. I have missed you guys. I have missed you. Yes, I have. Woo, that ADOC's life was giving me the business, family. I had to have a tooth that broke extracted. It's still sore, but I got my ibuprofen at the ready. Okay? So I've been taking my ibuprofen, feeling much better, thank you. Then I had technical issues on Sunday when I tried to go live with y'all. The struggle has been real trying to give y'all a show. But you know how it goes, family. The show absolutely must go on. And I am thrilled to see you guys over here on the live. Thank you so much for being here. Let me turn this off. There we go. Yes, family, it's so awesome to be back with you guys. Thank you so much for joining the live. Let me say hello to my illustrious audience, my co-host. Those of you that have selected the chat, I can't thank you enough for rolling with the sister. I know y'all been wondering, where's that big mouth child at? Where's that girl that tickled my phony bone? Because she just always hotter than fish grease. I know it. I miss y'all too. Toolbox Evolution, welcome to the live. Michael said, somebody in the church say Mickey Ficky. Mickey Ficky, family. Mickey Ficky. Justin Mathis, ADOS, New Jersey. Welcome to the live. Terry Lewis, welcome. And my sister from another mister, Tanya Princess Jones, welcome to the live, one and all. And for those of you who have yet to chat where you're slinging bricks from, I want to welcome you to the live. Well, y'all saw how I opened up the show, okay? I opened up the show with something quite disturbing for Mr. No on reparations. Now let's whitesplain how we couldn't get it done because the white folks wouldn't let me as the president of the born world, the free, allegedly, for white folks, immigrants, not all. Some immigrants get that work served on them too. But I'm talking about ADOC still ain't free. And this Mickey Vicky want to whitesplain. He want to whitesplain how he, as the president of the wealthiest country in all the free world, could not make an executive order, not even of HR 40, he couldn't make an executive order to even study it. He was a flat out no. I don't know if you guys recall him interviewing with Ta-Nehisi Coates. I'm not going to read all the articles that I've got open right now, but when he spoke with Ta-Nehisi Coates, when he was interviewed by Ta-Nehisi, he said it would not be fair. It would not be fair to give reparations to the American descendants of chattel slavery. Now, fast forward, after I done found out this man is worth $40 million since 2016. I don't know what he's worth today, but I know that's a large sum to have been paid to sell out the American descendants of chattel slavery who got you elected for 2 terms. That's what it is, okay? They are paying folks that look like us to have a sheep walk to the polls to vote against our own interest while it becomes the come up for them. When they sell us out, their money goes up. If you're Black and you sell out American descendants of chattel slavery or talk against reparations and the American descendants of chattel slavery, then your price tag goes up. You get paid. Because why? The color of white in this country is green. So now he's whitesplaining. Let me get over here to it. Let me stop this share. This share is how Fox, let me just put it on full and we can get into it. Fox News showed that the net worth of a Black family today is $17,150 as compared to white folks' net worth, $171,000. But Obama was a no to reparations because it would not have been fair. It would not have been fair to the immigrants, to the white folks who didn't put us in slavery, although they benefit from slavery. It just simply wouldn't be fair to give the descendants of American chattel slavery the reparations they are owed in the trillions over multi-generations. Now, Corey Lorenz, welcome to the live. Thank you for joining the live. So now, he's got a new story. Let's see where he's at today, family, shall we? Now, I'm not going to share the actual news outlet that I'm reading from. I will share with you verbally, but listen, they got so many bra and panty ads and carrying on. I'm not going to do that so they can ad me to death and I can barely get through the article. But when I opened up the show, this is the part. There are two parts to what he said that stuck in my craw. Let me, I'm just going to share the screen and leave this horrific. You guys need to understand why you are owed reparations. This is what these white folks have done. They stole it all. So I'm going to share my face, but I need this up for this to land in the newcomers who don't understand why we're at George Floyd 846. This right here, this is on Fox News, showing you what time it is as 87% of our electorate runs to the polls to vote for Biden. And we're going to get into him too. Y'all run to the polls to vote for Biden without demanding reparations in the Black agenda. You refused to weaponize your vote to socialize this suffering. And we are and remain the anchor of this country. We are at George Floyd 846 because where do you think these race soldiers are policing? In the neighborhood that's 17,150 or in the neighborhood that's 171,000? Okay, don't hurt yourself. Of course, they're in the areas where we're only net worth of $17,150 as they weaponize immigration against us, giving them set-asides and tax breaks to own businesses in our communities and deny us the very SBA loans so that we can thrive in the country our ancestors built with their lives. And Barack Obama said it wouldn't be fair to give us cash repair, and we're still fighting because Sheila Jackson Lee had the unmitigated gall, as did the rest of the panel who is on the HR 40 commission, which is why you see so many folks lined up to sign off on it, that they don't want cash reparations. They want to give more programs that they can give with the left and take away with the right. Barack Obama, who created 100 white millionaires during his tenure. Okay. He creates 1 million white millionaires while 53% of American descendants of chattel slavery lost the only wealth they had, their homes. Okay. So this man wants to sit up here and the first time around with Ta-Nehisi Coates. Hold on, family. I got to prop my camera up. Forgot to do that part. Just give me a second. Lord, today. Yeah. He was no, because it wasn't fair. Nobody talks about our chattel slavery, the ancestors' heinous chattel slavery not being fair. Not a word about that. But when it comes time to remedy American descendants of chattel slavery, now we want to deal in fairness. Okay, that was the first time with Ta-Nehisi Coates. You create 1 million white millionaires through your policies. You bail out the banks. You don't put audits on these banks to ensure our tax dollars are being recycled into our hands to create small business. You grant, I want to say, 2% or less in SBA small business loans to Blacks. Even George W. Bush Jr. gave 6%. You give less than 2%, and then you sit up in an interview with Ta-Nehisi Coates and tell him no to reparations because it would not be fair. And then you add insult to injury, okay? You won't go away and just play with your billionaire buddies, whom, like I said earlier, for the newcomers, you are now worth $40 million since 2016. They paid you well to sell us out. And now you want to speak on how reparations would be justified, but now you want to white-explain how you could not get that done. So I'm just going to leave this up here for y'all to meditate on these numbers while I read the newest puckery from President Obama, former President Obama, who says he couldn't do anything. You got the power of the executive pen to create 1 million white millionaires through your policy while telling us no to reparations. And why won't I let this go? Because it hurts us. Number one. Number two, he won't go away. If he shut up, guess what happens, family? I shut up. You see how that works? It's very easy. I don't even think about this man till he show up saying something stupid. I have no thoughts about it. But he refuses. He's so busy trying to remain relevant. I guess so the butter biscuits can continue to directly deposit into his account. Who knows? But let me get to the article. Hold on, let me jump to it. Ooh, do Jesus keep me near the fence and the cross? Okay. So, former President Barack Obama said he supported reparations for African Americans, but decided the issue was a non-starter during his administration because of white resistance. Me speaking. Was it because of white resistance, or you knew had you done so your first term, you would never have gotten a second? You see, family, we have got to understand that when white folks go left, we must go right and vice versa. When these white folks got behind this man, we should have known something was amiss. Something was awry. And we should have never voted his ass into office. Absolutely. We should not have done it. Okay? If they're for it, we must be against it. And now we got Jim Crow Sloppy Joe, segregationist Jim Crow Sloppy Joe, author of the 94 crime bill, who's done nothing to include us economically while giving away the farm to immigrants and transgender LGBTQIA. And folks want to keep telling me, just wait. How long we been waiting, family? Over 400 years? How long have we been waiting? You must watch the Netflix series Amend, okay? The 14th Amendment. And you'll get to see what these Mickey Thickies do when it's something exclusive for our inclusion and how they give it away and now it applies to everyone. That 14th Amendment was due to our ancestors enduring the worst heinous chattel slave labor known to the born world. And now everybody gets it, which is why I don't want your programs. I want each of us to get a good 1.52 mil. And we'll take it in installments. You know how we pay our credit cards, you know. And then you can decide where you want to go to school. You don't have to wait for an affirmative action and then the immigrants be as large as they are out here and tell you no to affirmative action. So your enrollment at the UC Berkeley diminishes down to 3% as compared to the immigrants. What are they, about 75%? The rest are white folks? Yeah, that's what happens when you do programs and policies. If you don't put a condition that it's exclusively for American descendants of chattel slavery, you know, like how they do for the Asians, how they do for the Latinx community. When it comes to our stuff, everybody's thrown in there. Under people of color, minority. Every time you mention black, you got to mention brown. That kind of nonsense when we know who endured and continues to endure institutional systemic racism in this country. It's not them. Oh, they're crying and belly aching like the Asians got a problem. All the while the Asians, whom we spend big money for because they consume our communities with nail salons and beauty supply stores. Okay? The Arabs own and run the 7-Elevens and the gas stations. So now the Asians won't even speak out about who's actually attacking them. They're worried that Biden giving them protections. And only recently I just saw something on George Floyd that they've done to dismantle qualified immunity. Family, forgive me if I'm not very hopeful. I'll dig into it on Sunday. I'm not going to go there today. That's not this conversation. And if I bring up another topic, honey child, we'll be here till tomorrow. And I'm just not trying to do all that. So I'll deal with that on Sunday. But yeah, you want to protect Asians when we've never received protections. That came immediately. Okay? So let me move on. Now, this is a part that got my goat, and there's another part that got my goat. Saying reparations were justified, Obama said that there's not much question that the wealth of this country, the power of this country, was built in significant part. You see? Not exclusively, maybe not even the majority of it, but a large portion of it was built on the backs of slaves. Now, let me take a breath. Before even reading an article, I want someone to tell me what industry was here before chattel slavery that in any way, shape, or form contributed to today's wealth. Let me know. What industry, for those all the way in the nosebleed section, what industry was here that paralleled, or even a portion of that industry, contributed to the wealth you see today? What seed was planted in the blood and bones in the soil of this country that is responsible, even in part, to the huge return on investment where you see on the screen that white folks' wealth is 171,000 to ADOC's wealth of 17,000. I'll wait. I am sick and tired of the boule amongst us tackling me and coming for my neck is with this kind of BS that Obama is on. Let me read it again for kicks and giggles. Saying reparations were justified, Obama said that there's not much question that the wealth of this country, the power of this country, was built in significant part. Not exclusively, maybe not even the majority of it, but a large portion of it was built on the backs of slaves. What else, Obama? What else, niggerati? What else contributed to the return on the investment that enriches white folks in this country to the tune of 171,000, to American descendant of chattel slavery, 17,000 net worth? I'd like to know. Well, in the meantime, while y'all think about that and meditate on that, let me just read an article. I'm going to jump back and forth and tell you how I see it in between in the mean. Okay, you know how I do over here. Hold on. Where's that Atlantic article? Here it is. Slavery made America. Since Obama is a Harvard graduate, but wants to say slavery in part contributed to the wealth in this country. Harvard educated, worth $40 million since 2016. We don't know what he's worth between. That wasn't in the Google, of course. They got a way of hiding things from us when they don't want us to use it on shows like this in the new black media. Yeah. So since 2016, I counted 40 million, and he was richer than I think he was at the top of all the white folks in that thread. A descendant of slave owners and a Kenyan father, not an American descendant of chattel slavery, says that slavery in part contributed to the wealth of this country with 3 Ks. Well, let's get into it. This article is dated June 24, 2014. Slavery Made America, the Case for Reparations, a Narrative Biography. Okay. Now, I'm going to jump down because I don't want to read all this. You can look up this article. It's in the Atlantic. It's a long one. Let me just read you this. By 1860, there were more millionaires, slaveholders, all of them. Hello, Mitch McConnell, worth about, I want to say 26 million, last count, living in the lower Mississippi Valley than anywhere else in the United States. In the same year, the nearly 4 million American slaves were worth some 3.5 billion with a B, making them the largest single financial asset in the entire U.S. economy, worth more than all manufacturing and railroads combined. So, of course, the war was rooted in these two expanding and competing economies. But competing over what? What eventually tore asunder America's political culture was slavery's expansion into the Western territories. I quote that a lot because it contradicts this idea of enslavement as ancillary to American history and establishes it as foundational. Blight was pulling from Roger Ransom's incredible paper, The Economics of the Civil War. Again, the numbers are simply mind-bending. In a state like South Carolina, almost 60% of the people were enslaved. Pulling from a great number of oral sources, Blight bids us not to forget that there were actual humans, not abstract figures, who were being enslaved. Not machines, our ancestors. In understanding the humanity of the enslaved, I don't know if there is a better book than The Life and Times of Frederick Douglass, because Douglass wrote 3 autobiographies and Life and Times is the longest. It tends to get short shrifted. Of course it does, but for my money, it's the best of the 3. And one of the most beautiful autobiographies ever written by an American. Douglas's portrait of slavery is just gripping. Forgive me for quoting at length. Here we go. The close-fisted stinginess that fed the poor slave on coarse cornmeal and tainted meat, that clothed him in crashy towel linen, and hurried him on to toil through the field in all weathers, with wind and rain beating through his tattered garments. And that scarcely gave even the young slave mother time to nurse her infant in the fence corner, wholly vanished on approaching the sacred precincts of the great house itself. There are the scriptural phrase descriptive of the wealthy found exact illustration. The highly favored inmates of this mansion were literally arrayed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day, akin to Barack and Michelle and their children. The table of this house groaned under the blood-brought luxuries gathered with painstaking care at home and abroad. Fields, forests, rivers, and seas were made tributary. Immense wealth and its lavish expenditures filled the great house with all that could please the eye or tempt the taste. Fish, flesh, and fowl were here in profusion. Chickens of all breeds, ducks of all kinds, wild and tame. The common and the huge muscovite, guinea fowls, turkeys, geese, and peafowls, all were fat and fattening for the destined vortex. Alas, this immense wealth, this gilded splendor, this profusion of luxury, this exemption from toil, this life of ease, this sea of plenty, were not the pearly gates they seemed to a world of happiness and sweet content to be. The poor slave on his hard pine plank, scantily covered with his thin blanket, slept more soundly than the feverish voluptuary who reclined upon his downy pillow. Food to the indolent is poison, not sustenance. Lurking beneath the rich and tempting viands were invisible spirits of evil, which filled the self-deluded gourmandizer with aches and pains, passions uncontrollable, fierce tempers, dyspepsia, rheumatism, lumbago, and gout. And of these, the Lloyds had a full share. Okay, I've had enough of that. I just cannot. You can read that article. Let me share it with you in the chat. But this Mickey Vicky wants to say, in part, slavery in part, not even just a little bit, contributed to the wealth of this country. It's shameful. Let me go back to the text. Hello to all of you who have joined the live. Thank you for being here. I'm going to try not to scream because it ain't y'all's fault. But Lord, this stuff, oh, do Jesus. Okay, do Black Jesus, okay? Anywho, going back to the article. All right. Let me read that again. Saying reparations were justified. Obama said that there's not much question that the wealth of this country, the power of this country was built in significant part, not exclusively, maybe not even the majority of it, but a large portion of it was built on the backs of slaves. Your Harvard-educated former president, worth $40 million in 2016, says this today. What's the date on this article? He said this on February 25th is when the article was written. This is a recent statement from your boy. The former two-term president said even after slavery was abolished, the systematic oppression and discrimination of Black Americans continued under Jim Crow. Despite that, Obama said he came to the conclusion that a push for reparations would go nowhere. Go nowhere for who, Barack? Your bottom line or American descendants of chattel slavery, 35 to 40 million strong in this country? Quote, and what I saw during my presidency was a politics of white resistance and resentment. The talk of welfare queens and the talk of the undeserving poor. Excuse me? Didn't you support crooked Hillary instead of Bernie Sanders? She called us welfare queens. But you endorsed her. And now, fast forward 2021, you want to sit up here and say the talk of welfare queens as if that matters today more than it did when her ass ran. Really? And the backlash against affirmative action. That mattered not for you when it came to DACA. I don't remember you checking in with the temperature of white folks when it came to DACA. I mean, somebody help me. Didn't that not get passed under Obama? Protections of the Hispanics under DACA? Obama said in a podcast talk with rocker Bruce Springsteen called Renegades Born in the USA. Quote, all that made the prospect of actually proposing any kind of coherent, meaningful reparations program struck me as politically not only a non-starter, but potentially counterproductive. He's saying this today. We're at George Floyd 846 because dollars bring dignity and being poor makes us targets. And he's saying this today to his buddy Bruce Springsteen. How can economic inclusion ever be counterproductive in terms of a conversation or an executive order? You had two terms. You didn't even say it going out the door. Whitesplaining is what I call it. Obama's comments signal something of an about face as he appeared to oppose reparations during his 2008 presidential campaign when he said the quote, the best reparations we can provide are good schools in the inner city and jobs for people who are unemployed. Once again, no distinction for American descendants of chattel slavery. Y'all act like magically class-based policies means our inclusion. We've got that already. Have we been included? The podcast was released Monday on Spotify as part of a partnership with the former president. Okay, I don't have to read that. Reparations have been debated for decades without any results. That's the way they intend. Representative Sheila Jackson Lee introduced a bill in Congress that would fund a study and create proposals on reparations, excluding cash repair. The commission shall examine slavery and discrimination in the colonies in the United States from 1619 to the present and recommend appropriate remedies without cash, according to the legislation. This is why, I'm going to pivot to this article next. This is why you see so many signatures flocking to HR 40. As a matter of fact, this is the part where everybody gets to be in the movement. Visit www.fixhr40. We're working on new legislation, but in the meantime and in between time, your marching orders and your scripts are in what I just shared in the chat. The White House said President Biden would be open to naming a group to study the issue. It's futile if you're not intending to use it to close the over $100 trillion egregious racial wealth gap. And if you're not going to do it with cash, what is your solution to our 17,000 net worth, to your 171,000 net worth, stolen from American descendants of chattel slavery? What's the solution? He certainly would, quote, he certainly would support a study of reparations, White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki said at a briefing earlier this month. He understands we don't need a study to take action right now on systemic racism, so he wants to take actions within his own government. In the meantime, we're running out of time. Y'all just saw 6 to 8 Democrats were a no to a $15 per hour minimum wage, when the median cost of a house in this country, the median cost is $340,000. And 6 Democrats or 8 were a no to the $15 minimum wage. And the author of the 94 crime bill, segregationist Jim Crow Sloppy Joe, and Skamala the Chameleon did not include that $15 per hour in the new COVID stimulus plan. They did not include that. So what are the Justice Democrats doing about that? Where you at, AOC? Where you at, Jamal Bowman? Where you at, Cori Bush, Ayanna Pressley, Ilhan? Where y'all at? Why haven't y'all taken to the streets over the fact that in Trump's stimulus, $903 billion was earmarked. $703 billion went to foreign countries, special interest groups, and lobbyists, right? We, the people, had to share $197 billion. Now you got a stimulus that you took down from 2,000 to 1,400, saying now it's going to be a total. But you're a no to a $15 per hour minimum wage. What's the minimum wage nationally? $7.95? I don't even know. Not enough to live on, right? So I don't even know. Like, you come in guns a-blazing to give transgenders the right to compete in girls' sports, while we are 17,000 net worth to your 171,000 net worth. But folks mad at me because I haven't given him enough time. We don't need a study to take action right now on systemic racism. So he wants to take actions within his own government in the meantime. You got the power of the pen until the Republicans take back the Senate. It's clear they already have the Senate. All this kerfuffle over ensuring that the Democrats were 51 in the Senate for nothing. They're still voting against the people's interest. What difference does it make? I keep telling y'all these are two wings of the same oligarch bird. They do not have American descendants of chattel slavery in mind at all. It is evident. He had the power of the executive pen to include it in the stimulus, and they took it out, and now the Democrats have voted it down, along with the Republicans. Moving on. Let's go to, let me share the screen. Hold on, guys. I meant to do this at the top of the show. I'll stop this share. And I'm going to, I got to do the copyright disclaimer because I'm going to share a YouTube video at the end of the show before they give me a copyright strike. So let this play real quick. Hold on one second, guys. Ooh, to Jesus. Under Title 17, Section 107, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use, the tips to the balance in favor of fair use. This is the copyright disclaimer. Okay, there, that's done. Okay, let's go next to Reparations Matter. I'm going to share this article with you guys. Accountability begins with understanding. I want you guys to know that I'm reading from this Forbes article, and I'll share it after I read. This article is from Forbes, it's by Douglas Haynes, dated February 2nd of this year. Last month's violent insurrection at the U.S. Capitol overshadowed the reintroduction of H.R. 40 on January 4, 2021. Me speaking, there was nothing to see. It was a total zoo. Introduced by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, this bill provides for funding for a commission to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans. They want $12 million. Our edits say it should be free. We already pay you a salary, and you built $25 million into the last stimulus relief for yourselves. So you don't need $12 million to study reparations. I could just give you some of my notes for free, and we can get this done. Reparations don't need a study. It needs to get done. The two events could not be more different. One was a violent assault on the U.S. Congress by extremists. The other reflected the deliberate lawmaking process of a modern democracy. In seeking to decertify the votes of millions of Americans, the protesters sought nothing less than the restoration of white supremacy in the slogans, "Make America Great Again" or "Take Back Our Country." By contrast, the co-sponsors of the House bill called on the federal government to finally come to terms with the cost and consequences of the legal enslavement and differential treatment of Black people in both the past and present. Like I always mention to you guys on this show, the $104 trillion on the low end that we are owed is for slavery, Jim Crow, and accrued ongoing systemic racism, oppression, and disadvantage in the country our ancestors built with their lives. The operative word being ongoing. Okay? To put it another way, the white protesters appealed to anti-Blackness as a birthright, while the House members wanted to eliminate its scale and scope across time. Well, that's kind of hard to do when you got folks like Biden who have said that was 300 years ago. We don't owe you anything. We'll get into it. Reparation refers to an accounting for harm as a precondition for assigning responsibility. Without understanding the contours of harm, an apology cannot credibly or morally address the harm, much less compensate for it. Such an accounting for slavery and discrimination has never been undertaken by the federal government, although this dereliction has not been due to a want of trying. Since 1989, when Representative John Conyers and members of the Congressional Black Caucus first introduced H.R. 40, neither the House nor the Senate have adopted its key provisions. Then, as now, the purpose of the bill is for the government of the U.S. to assume responsibility for the historical and contemporary treatment of Black people based on an analysis of evidence, not on good intentions or hopes for a better world. To be sure, Congress did apologize for slavery and discrimination in a concurrent resolution in 2009. To be exact, it was August 29th, 2009. In a House resolution, I want to say it was number 194, if you want to look that up. This resolution captures how an apology without a full accounting does little to advance racial justice, but actually prolongs the harm to Black people. The resolution acknowledged the existence of slavery, the brutalization of Black people, and the injustice of Jim Crow segregation and its continuing vestiges after civil rights legislation in the 1960s. Time out. Who was president when this House resolution apology was written and passed? Barack Obama. So this is what they do so well, family. They can roll off, trippingly off the tongue, all of the harm due us from slavery. They can recite that eloquently. But when it comes to doing anything to close the over $100 trillion egregious racial wealth gap, they have no solutions, even the current H.R. 40. They're trying to give more programs with the left that they give away with the right. So it can acknowledge all of that and still be a nothing burger. Nor is there a single reference to white people in this apology. Instead, the resolution, that's similar to what you heard earlier in the opening of the show, how Joe Biden weaponized the execution of George Floyd by the race soldiers, and then pivoted in that same speech to it's not white folks' fault, and then pivoted to protections for the Asians. I digress. Moving on back to the article. So instead, the resolution shifts the burden for racial healing and reconciliation to Black people. So they want to create our oppression and they want our vote to be the solution while doing nothing. It's on us to close the over $100 trillion egregious racial wealth gap with a net worth of $17,000 to white folks $171,000. That's on us. While admitting that a confession and an apology cannot undo the past, members of Congress hope that it, quote, will help bind the wounds of the nation that are rooted in slavery and can speed racial healing and reconciliation and help the people of the United States understand the past and honor the history of all people of the United States. So basically, they just want to say, I'm sorry. They want reconciliation. They want apology without redress. While we're the anchor of this country. The concluding disclaimer invalidates even this gesture of contrition. Nothing in this resolution authorizes or supports any claim against the U.S. or serves as a settlement of any claim against the U.S. This apology is ultimately a hollow gesture. It assumes that an apology is a sufficient form of acknowledgement and responsibility. The existence of systemic racism demonstrates that it is neither. Why should Americans assume responsibility for something that the U.S. government refuses to? And it's for this reason that Black people and their experiences in the past and the present remain subject to the vagaries of indifference, willful ignorance, and alternative facts. Even the current so-called reckoning is not the same thing as an accounting for harm. Black Lives Matter solidarity statements, procurement campaigns, and diversifying the C-suite are important steps. These gestures do not get to the heart of the matter. Until there is a commission to study and develop proposals for reparation, Black people will have no choice but to defend their humanity and to continue to insist that their lives matter. Let me share that one with y'all. Welcome to Live, one and all. Welcome to the live. Okay, I'm going on to, I'm gonna close that out. I think I forgot to share one with y'all. Okay, what is this one here? I want to jump to, what time am I at? 6:54. Okay. I'm going to try not to keep y'all too long. I always promise that. And never quite do it. So let me just talk about a couple of headlines that I pulled. What Democrat, this is from AZ Central on December 20th, 2019. What Democrats said about immigration and reparations at the latest debate. Now, I'm setting the stage to share with you how unexcited you need to be that Biden is suggesting he's in support of H.R. 40. He can make that an executive order. There's no money tied to that. If he was really interested in H.R. 40, he could have done it with the stroke of a pen. That's number one. Here, you've got him here in this article. Basically, at the top of the show, I shared on the debate stage when he was asked about reparations, how he pivoted to immigrants having built this country, Hispanics in particular. Another time he weaponized Hispanics against us was when he was in that meeting with the civil rights leaders. Told them to get used to it. Hispanics is running things. Why is that? Because just like they made the Irish white, the Jews white, the Italians white, the Hispanics are being made white. Many of them identify as white, especially the fair complected ones. And why do they need that? Because their numbers are shrinking. And so what they're doing is they're partnering with the immigrants, the Asians, all of this. They're trying to coalesce them for, number one, to replace our vote. They don't want to need this black vote no more now that we're waking up. And I'm going to share with you what I mean by weaponize our vote and socialize our suffering towards the end of the show. But they need to replace the vote. They need a permanent underclass. We've been earmarked since we were dragged here. And they need whiteness. They need to stay in power. So if their numbers are dwindling as the brown people's numbers expand, hence why they're pivoting towards immigration and in a rush to give the 11 million here illegals a pathway to citizenship before doing anything for us like an executive order for HR 40. So here the article says, yes, and okay, let me see here. I'll tell you specifically what he said when asked. Former Vice President Joe Biden was asked about the reparations issue, but instead returned to immigration. He said that walking away from immigrant children is stupid and immoral and bad for America. Me speaking. So slavery wasn't bad for this country. Slavery was not immoral. You're asked a question about reparations, and this is the way you respond. Quote, they are the future of America, and we should invest in them, he said. While you invest in prisons for American descendants of chattel slavery. Hello, author of the 94 crime bill, who's done nothing, and we're 7 weeks into your administration for American descendants of chattel slavery to close the over $100 trillion egregious racial wealth gap. They are the future of America. We should invest in them. Oh, I said that part. Okay, so that's that. Okay. So it makes this is another piece. The cost of racism. This country is willing to lose money. This country is willing to lose money before giving American descendants of chattel slavery a pathway to being American. U.S. economy lost $16 trillion because of discrimination, a bank says. Nationwide protests have cast a spotlight on racism and inequality in the United States. Now a major bank has put a price tag on how much the economy has lost as a result of discrimination against African Americans. $16 trillion. Since 2000, U.S. gross domestic product lost that much as a result of discriminatory practices in a range of areas, including in education and access to business loans, according to a new study by Citigroup. It's not an insignificant number. By comparison, U.S. GDP totaled $19.5 trillion last year. And not acting to reverse discrimination practices will continue to exact a cost. Citigroup estimates that the economy would see a $5 trillion boost over the next 5 years if the U.S. were to tackle key areas of discrimination, specifically against African Americans. So we believe we have a responsibility to address current events and to frame them with an economic lens in order to highlight the real costs of longstanding discrimination against minority groups, especially against Black people, and particularly in the U.S., wrote Raymond J. McGuire, a vice chairman at the bank and the chairman of its banking, capital markets, and advisory team. Wall Street itself has also faced accusations for years of discriminatory practices against African Americans, such as limiting approval for mortgages or not providing enough banking options in minority neighborhoods, which are among the damaging actions identified by Citigroup researchers. Specifically, the study came up with $16 trillion in lost GDP by noting 4 key racial gaps between African Americans and whites. $13 trillion lost in potential business revenue because of discriminatory lending to African American entrepreneurs, with an estimated 6.1 million jobs not generated as well. As a result, $2.7 trillion in income lost because of disparities in wages suffered by African Americans, $218 billion loss over the past 2 decades because of discrimination in providing housing credit, and $90 million to $113 billion in lifetime income lost from discrimination in accessing higher education. But the Justice Democrats want the class-based policy of erasing all student loan debt, when only about 18% of American descendants of chattel slavery even hold a degree. It's another white wealth transfer that they're seeking in these class-based policies, instead of reparations. That's what the Justice Democrats are fighting for. I see you, Nina Turner. I've yet to hear you or see on your wall anything about reparations. You're running for Congress. As a result, Citigroup urges a slew of actions to reverse discriminatory practices and boost GDP over the next 5 years, including addressing the wage gap suffered by African Americans and promoting diversity at the top within banks and companies. Citigroup's recommendations aren't new. Various studies have shown similar findings, and experts have called for similar action for years, though so far progress has been slow. And yet, Sheila Jackson Lee wants $12 million to study it. This is NPR. I'm sharing this one. I'll be back over, guys, to tell you, give you love after I read my featured Shiro, Shiro's bio. I'm going to read Billie Holiday is my featured freed woman for Freedman History every day of the year. That's what I intend to do on this show. I'm not just giving us a month. I can't cover it all in a month. So it'll just have to be every day of every year. And I'm proud of that decision. So I'm going to finish all of my commentary about the puckery going on in this country with our elected officials. And then I'm going to read a bio, come over and chat with you guys a bit and see what your comments are and welcome you. And then I'm going to play us out with a song performed by Billie Holiday. Okay? So let me just finish my work and then we can get into Billie, and I'll come back over just a second. I'm trying to share these things because I always forget after the show. This show, shout out to all of the new Black media. It's very much fun to teach, right? But as an empath, this wears me all the way out, okay? Because in order to teach it to you, I have to study this for myself and for the way I see it. And it's a lot. But when I get weary, I just reflect on what the ancestors endured. And I pick myself up and I dust myself off and I keep going until we reach critical mass and even beyond that. This is my square. So that's how I see it, okay? But it's a lot. It's a lot on me emotionally. It really is. But it's a lot on us because, you know, people in the movement, we take cat naps. The people are forever on our minds and how to fix it. Forever on our minds. So let me go back. To Biden. and how all of these things I just shared. Okay, so these are all the reasons why I don't believe Biden at all. The aforementioned, and then I found another article. Joe Biden's 1975 comment slamming slavery reparations, school busing resurfaced by the Washington Post. This article is from March 5th. Wait, I'm sorry. No. Just give me a second. March 8th, 2019, the Washington Times. Former VP and potential 2020 presidential candidate Joe Biden is defending his record on civil rights after the Washington Post resurfaced a 75 interview in which the then senator opposed slavery reparations and school busing. Mr. Biden told the People paper, a Delaware-based weekly newspaper in 75, quote, "I do not buy the concept popular in the 60s, which said we have suppressed the black man for 300 years and the white man is now far ahead in the race for everything our society offers. In order to even the score, we must now give the black man a head start or even hold the white man back to even the race." I don't buy that. I don't feel responsible for the sins of my father and grandfather, he continued at the time. I feel responsible for what the situation is today, for the sins of my own generation, and I'll be damned if I feel responsible to pay for what happened 300 years ago. In the interview, Mr. Biden also opposed government efforts to desegregate schools by busing white children to majority black schools and black children to majority white schools. I oppose busing. It's an asinine concept, the utility of which has never been proven to me, he said. I've gotten to the point where I think our only recourse to eliminate busing may be a constitutional amendment. Quote, "The new integration plans being offered are really just quota systems to assure a certain number of blacks, Chicanos, or whatever in each school. That to me is the most racist concept you can come up with," he said. Quote, me speaking. Do you see how all these fights for our economic inclusion ends up being deemed by immigrants and white folks as reverse discrimination? That's how ADOC's Ward Connerly got rid of our affirmative action out here. That gave, quotas to help us be educated. That's what happened. Was it Washington State that earmarked all that money from the COVID relief to help blacks in particular, and whites and Asians stood up and filed a lawsuit calling it discrimination? This is what I'm telling you about these white folks. We got so many fires to put out that we failed to understand that our demise and denying us our justice claim and making us fourth-class citizens in the country of our ancestors, this is something that they do like in planning like 100 years ago. This was 1975. And this Mickey Thicky sits up here and says integrating the schools is the most racist concept you could come up with, he said. What it says is in order for your child with curly black hair, brown eyes, and dark skin to be able to learn anything, he needs to sit next to my blonde hair, blue-eyed son. That's racist with an exclamation point. Who the hell do we think we are? That the only way a black man or woman can learn is if they rub shoulders with my white child. Now, me speaking, he knows full well what he was doing here. He is trying to make this argument about our capacity to learn when the argument is, even to this day, I have shared with you guys how I had to fight to get my daughter in a more diverse public school to this day when she was going to middle school because of school of choice systems out here. All of it is public school dollars. And I pay into that because I'm a homeowner, right? And for the newcomers, I know some of you guys get tired of hearing my stories, but repetition, I need you to understand how all this comes together for our oppression and our extinction and the denial of our reparations and to make us fourth-class citizens in the country of our ancestor. I need for us to look at the puzzle in its totality. Because if you read this, you would think, oh, he's trying to give them credit for being smart enough to learn independent of white folks. When he knows full well what this is about, it's about resources. Long story short, when my daughter started kindergarten, they had school of choice ad nauseum. I chose 12 with the best API scores, meaning the kids were being taught, and I only got 2. I put her in a beautiful primary school, K through 5, in a white cul-de-sac, nothing but money. It may have been 2% Black, 2% Asian, 2% Hispanic, the rest were white kids. Public school. So, of course, she was privileged to what would be considered a private public school education. By the time she was ready for middle school, however, these Mickey Fickies kicked all of the Black and brown kids back to the hood. I live in what is called a marginal community. It's been gentrified now. I mean, it's only got a couple of more buildings to be sold before it's fully gentrified. But on the backside, within walking distance, is a predominantly Black and brown school. APIs suck. So this is what they did to the Black and brown children when my daughter was ready to go to middle school. And so we were livid because here you go from like a private public school education in a white cul-de-sac with all the money. And now you want to kick our children back to the jungle. So my child, you want your API scores to be raised on the spirit of my daughter is what you're attempting to do. And my tax dollars, my property taxes are supposed to be used for you to funnel all the resources to the white schools. I'm supposed to use my tax dollars to pay for your white kids to get a better education than mine. You've got me all the way mixed up. And so many of us wrote to the superintendent, never got a response. Well, I found out where his ass was going to be. I packed up my child and a co-parent who helped me with transportation to and from school and busted up in a meeting at one of these elementaries. The moment I opened my mouth, he knew it was my email that he failed to respond to. He told me, yeah, before I show all the way out up in this very white meeting, I will do it. Yes, Miss Jones, I'm coming. Yeah. Afterwards, he came over and told us, yes, we could go into a school that he would find space, not the number one white private public school in the area, right? Not the one that's 4 miles from my house. He commuted us 20 miles each way to another school damn near in Lakewood, okay? And we're in Long Beach. Anywho, so that's what we had to do. There were no buses. So we literally, me and my very dear friend had to take the children to and from school every day. And this Mickey Vicky in 75 wants to act like it's about us, folks assuming that we're too inferior unless we're next to whiteness in order to be educated. When he knows it's about public dollars being siphoned from the Black and brown schools to support the white public schools in the community. Mr. Biden declined the Post's request for an interview, but his spokesman, Bill Russo, said the former VP still believes he was right to oppose busing. That's enough of that article. But this is who 87% of our electorate decided was better than a racist in office for 4 years. Let me share this one with you. And now I'm supposed to believe that Biden is now reformed. Yeah. I'm supposed to believe he's now reformed. Okay, so that's that one. So let me X this one out. And then I'll move on to the next. Now, so I laid the foundation for why I don't believe Biden. I think he's a liar. I don't believe anything about this man is reformed. Biden's top aide says White House will start acting now on reparations for African Americans. This is a Yahoo News on March 1st of this year. Let's get into it. Quote, we have to do stuff now to improve the plight, status, and future empowerment of Black people all around the country. This week, President Joe Biden's senior advisor, Cedric Richmond, confirmed that the White House plans to, quote, start acting now on reparations for African American citizens. Do y'all believe that? Am I just being cynical? Richmond made the stunning admission to journalist Mike Allen during Sunday's evening's broadcast of Axios on HBO. In the interview, the former Louisiana lawmaker explained to Allen that Biden remains consistent in his support of H.R. 40, the House of Reps bill that received a congressional hearing last month that would look into the issue of reparations. Me speaking. Why isn't this an executive order? We have to start breaking down systemic racism and barriers that have held people of color back, and especially African Americans who were enslaved, Richmond explained. We have to do stuff now to improve the plight, status, and future empowerment of Black people all around the country. When the House Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties held a Zoom hearing on reparations, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki told reporters Biden, quote, would support a study of reparations, end quote, and pointed to an executive order the president signed that begins to address racial inequality. But Richmond seemingly took a more concrete stance, explaining, quote, we don't want to have to wait on a study that we even support. We're going to start acting now. However, after Allen asked if there would be actual financial payments given to the descendants of slaves, the White House advisor was less definitive. Quote, I can't tell you what the time frame on the bill is, but I can tell you this. If you start talking about free college tuition to historically Black colleges and universities, and you start talking about free community college and all of those things, I think you are well on your way, Richmond responded. Now, I'm going to stop the article there. I need to help you understand that free college, because folks that come for me in my feed telling me that this is what our fight needs to be about, not reparations. Let me make 2 points here. A free college education doesn't close the over $100 trillion egregious racial wealth gap, nor does it guarantee employment in a country that has robbed us of the affirmative action due us, which now benefits white women, immigrants, and LGBTQIA. I'm not discouraging you from getting your degree, but please understand that the majority of us that have degrees, I'm an exception. I know many exceptions, but let me make it plain for you. There are far more degrees without jobs and who are suffering from underemployment than there are with them. So being college degree gets us a mound of debt with no job guarantees. So once again, Biden and the rest of these folks can pretend to be in support of it to pander for the vote, because 2022 is around the corner. And you've got to overstand and start to weaponize your vote to socialize this suffering, or we are done. We may have one more election in us only because some of the groups are divided. But the more immigrants he helps, the more it shores up the Democratic vote. And I'm going to share with you how to weaponize your vote towards the end of the show. I just want you to know it's a nothing burger. It's a nothing burger. And so that's why you hear all these people talking about Biden supports reparations. Biden supports yippee, like it's something to celebrate. This Mickey Vicky is telling us to pivot towards free education, as if that comes with a jobs guarantee. Don't be fooled. Don't be lulled back to sleep, family. Just don't do it. Don't do it. I changed my mind. I'm going to come over and read the comments before I go into Billie and then close us out. I'm going to have an exchange with you guys, and then I'm going to read about Billie and close with a beautiful song that sadly is still so relevant to this day. Hold on, I'm just trying to close some of these screens. Ooh, to Jesus. Yeah, we got all these fires we got to put out. Their plan has been in place forever to undermine and undo us. Okay, let me come back and see what you guys have got to say. What's up, Trey? I see you, fam. I'm just reading the pertinent comments, and then I'm going to get into Billie. My hostess with the mostest. Hey, I've missed you more. Oh, thank you, Terry. Yes, I missed you guys. Corey, Lorenz, thank you for joining the live. Mike Michelson said, don't shut up, sis. That is Adolph's children. Welcome to the live, my love. That 1.5 is a beautiful figure to start. Yeah, 1.5 million is my square. Yeah, we deserve to be included. I mean, everybody eats from the table that we have the legs on. So yeah, we'll take installments. You ain't got to do it all at once. Let's see here. What's up, Teresa Moses? Thank you for joining the live, my love. Bonito Evans Smith, thank you. Maurice Carlisle, thank you. I'm not tired of hearing your stories. Oh, God bless you, darling. Sometimes I feel like a broken record, but they say repetition is the key to learning. So I know quite a few people watch in silence. And they don't know all my stories, but y'all been rolling with his sister for a while. Y'all can probably tell me my stories. Mike Michelson said, these folks is crafty. Yeah. Let's see here. Okay, I shared some articles with y'all. Yeah, Bonita, so many fights. We can't even get some of us graduated, much less college. Come on now, sis. Beautiful background picture. Oh, thank you. It's a little off-center. I was in a rush, but this is a beautiful divider. So it hides, boxes and papers in my home, and it's double-sided. I'll show you guys the other side, the next time around. But it has a beautiful golden Buddha print on the other side. That's an elephant, but it's oriental, an oriental screen, when you need to zhuzh up the house and you want to hide all of your stuff. This is the way I do it. So thank you for noticing. When I did the green screen, I don't know what happened to my camera. Just be having technical issues. But thank you guys for joining the live. Let's get into Billie Holiday, and then I'm going to let me for those of you. Oh, wait. Someone gave a donation. I guess they must have watched the archive. So I took a picture of it, and I want to make sure I thank that person for the donation. Let me wave the banner just in the event you'd like to give to the show and enable me to continue educating the masses and advocating for ADOCs. You could do so right here. Let me show it. And I want to find this I like to thank you guys personally. It's just so beautiful. There it is. When you guys give to the show, I'm so grateful from the bottom of my heart. To Ruby Love Gems, if you're out there, thank you for the generous donation. I greatly appreciate you. I appreciate all of you who have given. Some of you don't even put your name, you give anonymously, but I'm so grateful to you for helping to support my work. It is an honor and a privilege to have my voice appreciated and supported by my very people and the allies. Thank you. So let me get into it. I'm going to let that run just a little bit. I'll be back to take it down. So let's talk about Billie Holiday. Now, if you haven't seen the movie, you must watch it. Andra Day was just sheer fire to me. I mean, from one artist to another. I was a performance artist and actress in my past life and had an absolute ball morphing into different characters. And my mom put me into modeling and into acting when I was, around 10 years old because I got teased profusely for being so tall, right? And it was a shot to my self-esteem. Can y'all imagine me having a self-esteem issue? Look at me now. But when she put me into modeling and into acting, I just started feeling myself, okay? You couldn't keep me out of heels. I stand 5'10". Now, today, that's nothing, right? My daughter's 5'10". But back in the day, when I was growing up, I was the baby of the bunch, and I was the tallest. And I mean, they wore me out. The very boys I wanted to make my boyfriend would call me things like Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Jolly Green Giant, Too Tall Jones. I mean, it was dreadful. I would come home crying, or I would end up trying to beat the boys. And you can't beat no boy, no matter how tall you are. I was just a girl, and I just wanted love. And my mom put me into modeling, and it changed my whole entire world. And then she put me into acting, and I love transforming into these beautiful, rich Black characters through these amazing, extraordinary playwrights. So that took me, my area of expertise was math. I love math and I love reading, as you can tell. And so my mom did not want me to be a broke artist. So she said, you need to major in something where you can feed yourself. And so I chose finance and got my degree in finance. But no sooner than the ink was dried on the degree was I auditioning, and I landed a starring role in a national tour that took me back east for about 13 years before I relocated out here west and had to put the art down. I had to choose between motherhood and the arts because it's all consuming. And so when I see Andra Day, I think she lost something like 50 pounds, somewhere around there for that role. From one artist to another, I know what it took for her to be vulnerable in that part. Now, listen, I don't agree with everything that's happening in the movie. I believe that, one of my ministers said it perfectly well. Porn shock or something, she said he was that type of director. He just likes things to be so gritty and just so diabolical to me. I'm not a fan of him as a director. I don't like the way he ties gay into everything he does. Like, okay, I'm not even going to go there because I'm not a homophobe, but can we just watch the story of Billie unfold? Do we have to have it be so gratuitous? And do we have to have this element in it so much? But anywho, I digress. I'm focused on Andra Day, and what she delivered was powerful. And so that's what inspired me to make Billie Holiday my freedwoman shero for today's series, okay? Deep appreciation for the artists, the musicians. It's just, hey, it's how I'm wired. Billie Holiday, born April 7, 1915, and I'm reading her bio from BillieHoliday.com. She was born April 7, 1915 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She was a superstar of her day. She first rose to prominence in the 30s with a unique style that reinvented the conventions of modern singing and performance. More than 80 years after making her first recording, Billie's legacy continues to embody what is elegant and cool in contemporary music. Holiday's complicated life in her genre-defining autobiography, Lady Sings the Blues, made her a cultural icon. The evocative, soulful voice which she boldly put forth as a force for good turned any song she sang into her own. Today, Billie Holiday is remembered for her musical masterpieces, her songwriting skills, creativity, and courageous views on inequality and justice. Holiday, born Eleanora Fagan Gough, grew up in a jazz-soaked Baltimore of the 20s. In her early teens, the beginning part of her apprenticeship was spent singing along with the records of iconoclast Bessie Smith and Louis Armstrong. In 1929, Billie's mother, Sadie Fagan, moved to New York in search of better jobs. Young Eleanora soon joined her there and began showing up at jazz clubs to audition and sing with resident pianists. She made debuts in obscure Harlem nightclubs, sharing tips with other dancers and comedians on the bill. Around this time, she borrowed her professional name, Billie Holiday, from screen actress Billie Dove. Although she never received technical training and never learned how to read music, Holiday quickly became an active participant in what was then the most vibrant jazz scene in the country. As the Harlem Renaissance transitioned into the swing era. At age 18, after gathering more life experience than most adults, Holiday was spotted by producer John Hammond, with whom she cut her first record as part of a studio group led by clarinetist Benny Goodman, then on the verge of his own superstardom. From 1935 to 1941, Holiday's career accelerated, recording hit after hit with pianist arranger Teddy Wilson. Simultaneously, in 1936, she began a legendary string of collaboration with tenor sax giant Lester Young, whose complimentary tone was a perfect trading partner for Billie. They became the best of friends and inseparable, legendary musical partners, even living together with Billie's mother for a time. Lester would famously christen her Lady Day, as she would him the Prez. By the time Holiday joined Kansas City's phenomenal Count Basie Orchestra for tours in 1937, she was an unstoppable force, suited for top billing across the United States. In 1938, Artie Shaw invited her to front his orchestra, making Billie the first Black woman to work with a white band, an impressive and courageous accomplishment. In the 1930s, during her epic run at Barney Josephson's Cafe Society in Manhattan, she was introduced to the poem Strange Fruit, a horrific depiction of lynchings in the southern United States. The music was written just for Billie, and it became the hallmark of her concerts. It's considered by scholars to be the first protest song of the civil rights era. The lyric was so controversial that her record label wouldn't record it. So she jumped over to the independent Commodore Records, where she could record and sing as she pleased. Strange Fruit immediately became a cultural spark point and a hit record too. In 1933, with Arthur Herzog Jr., she wrote God Bless the Child, a composition that transcends the ages and is now part of the Great American Songbook and Jazz Lexicon. In 1944, she signed with prestigious Decca Records, cutting still more classics and even a couple duets with her first musical hero, Louis Armstrong, with whom she later starred in the Hollywood film The New Orleans. That was in 1949. Starting at 1952, Billie began a 5-year run with Norman Granz' Clef Verve label. Granz was the entrepreneur behind the Jazz at the Philharmonic series, and he was very sensitive to the needs of artists. He put Billie back into small group settings from which her genius had originally grown. Together they made roughly 100 new recordings, constituting Billie's first forays into the high-fidelity album era. Her voice became more rugged and shockingly intimate. She put this new signature sound on scores of stirring ballads, such as her self-reflecting composition, Lady Sings the Blues. During this period, she expanded her repertoire while also re-recording many of her 30s classics in her new style. Redefining herself as the torch singer, she appeared twice on TV's Tonight Show with Steve Allen on CBS's historic The Sound of Jazz program, and also toured Europe. In 1958, she signed to Columbia Records, the long-term home base of A&R man John Hammond, who had been instrumental in her early career. For Columbia, she created her swan song masterpiece album, Lady in Satin. Final studio recordings were made for MGM in March '59 and were released posthumously. Billie Holiday died at the age of 44 and is buried at St. Raymond Cemetery in Bronx County, New York. Her music and life continue to inspire tributes, whether it's Nina Simone covering Strange Fruit, Diana Ross starring as Lady Day in the film Lady Sings the Blues, U2 pinning their hit Angel of Harlem, her image on a United States postage stamp, Time Magazine Song of the Century Award, scores of biographies, and a dozen Grammy Awards. Her emotive voice, innovative technique, and touching songs will forever be a hallmark of genius. Despite her lack of technical training, Holiday's uncanny syncopations, her inimitable phrasing, and her dramatic intensity made her the outstanding jazz singer of her day. White gardenias worn in her hair were her trademark, ever combining her typical humor with profound gravitas. She wrote in her autobiography, singing songs like The Man I Love or Porgy is no more work than sitting down and eating Chinese roast duck. And I love roast duck. I've lived songs like that. Let me share the screen while I read this next article about the feds being instrumental in the death of Billie Holiday. I want to show her image and not mine. And then I'll pray us out and then play the song that caused the feds to come for her jugular and for her very life, because she loved ADOX, Black and Strong. So let me share the screen, and then I'll read the next article, pray us out, and then close out with Billie, the incomparable Billie Holiday. Just give me a second, family, to get it centered. Just a second, I want to center her. As I read this article. Let me see how that looks over there with you guys. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay. The hunting of Billie Holiday. How Lady Day was in the middle of a Federal Bureau of Narcotics fight for survival. This was written on January 17th, 2015. From his first day in office in 1930, Harry Anslinger had a problem, and everybody knew it. He had just been appointed head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, a tiny agency buried in the great bowels of the Treasury Department in Washington, D.C., and it seemed to be on the brink of being abolished. This was the old Department of Prohibition, but Prohibition had been abolished, and his men needed a new role and fast. As he looked over his new staff just a few years before his pursuit of Billie Holiday began, he saw a sunken army who had spent 14 years waging war on alcohol only to see alcohol win and win big. These men were notoriously corrupt and crooked, but now Harry was supposed to whip them into a force capable of wiping drugs from the United States forever. Harry believed he could. He believed that the response to being dealt a weak hand should always be to dramatically raise the stakes. He pledged to eradicate all drugs everywhere, and within 30 years, he succeeded in turning this crumbling department with these disheartened men into the headquarters for a global war that would continue for decades. He could do it because he was a bureaucratic genius, but even more crucially, because there was a deep strain in American culture that was waiting for a man like him with a sure and certain answer to their questions about chemicals. Jazz was the opposite of everything Harry Anslinger believed in. It is improvised, relaxed, free form. It follows its own rhythm. Worst of all, it is a mongrel music made up of European, Caribbean, and African echoes, all mating on American shores. To Anslinger, this was musical anarchy, and evidence of a recurrence of the primitive impulses that lurk in Black people, waiting to emerge. It sounded, his internal memo said, like the jungles in the dead of night. Another memo warned that unbelievably ancient, indecent rites of the East Indies are resurrected in this Black man's music. The lives of the jazzmen, he said, reek of filth. His agents reported back to him that many among the jazzmen think they are playing magnificently when under the influence of marijuana, but they're actually becoming hopelessly confused and playing horribly. The Bureau believed that marijuana slowed down your perception of time dramatically, and this was why jazz music sounded so freakish. The musicians were literally living at a different inhuman rhythm. Quote, music has charms, their memos say, but not this music. Indeed, Anslinger took jazz as yet more proof that marijuana drives people insane. For example, the song That Funny Reefer Man contains the line, at any time he gets a notion, he can walk across the ocean. Anslinger's agents warned that that's exactly what drug users were like. He does think that. Anslinger looked out over a scene filled with rebels like Charlie Parker, Louis Armstrong, and Thelonious Monk. And as the journalist Larry Sloman recorded, he longed to see them all behind bars. He wrote to all the agents he had sent to follow them and instructed, please prepare all cases in your jurisdiction involving musicians in violation of the marijuana laws. We will have a great national roundup arrest of all such persons on a single day. I will let you know what day. His advice on drug raids to his men was always simple: shoot first. He reassured congressmen that his crackdown would affect not the good musicians, but the jazz type. But when Harry came for them, the jazz world would have one weapon that saved them: its absolute solidarity. Anslinger's men could find almost no one among them who was willing to snitch. And whenever one of them was busted, they all chipped in to bail him out. In the end, the Treasury Department told Anslinger he was wasting his time taking on a community that couldn't be fractured. So he scaled down his focus until it settled like a laser on a single target, perhaps the greatest female jazz vocalist there ever was. He wanted to bring the full thump of the federal government down upon the scourge of modern society, his public enemy number one, the late, great Billie Holiday. One night in 1939, Billie Holiday stood on a stage in New York City, sang a song that was unlike anything anyone had heard before, Strange Fruit was a musical lament against lynching. It imagined black bodies hanging from trees as a dark fruit native to the South. Here was a black woman before a mixed audience, grieving for the racist murders in the United States. Immediately after, Billie Holiday received her first threat from the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Harry had heard whispers that she was using heroin, and after she flatly refused to be silent about racism, he assigned an agent named Jimmy Fletcher to track her every move. Harry hated to hire black agents, but if he sent white guys into Harlem and Baltimore, they stood out straight away. Jimmy Fletcher was the answer. His job was to bust his own people, but Anslinger was insistent that no black man in his bureau could ever become a white man's boss. Jimmy was allowed through the door at the bureau, but never up the stairs. He was and would remain an archive man, a street agent whose job was to figure out who was selling, who was supplying, and who should be busted. He would carry large amounts of drugs with him, and he was allowed to deal drugs himself so he could gain the confidence of the people he was secretly plotting to arrest. Many agents in this position would shoot heroin with their clients to prove they weren't cops. We don't know whether Jimmy joined in, but we do know he had no pity for addicts. Quote, "I never knew a victim," he said. "You victimize yourself by becoming a junkie." He first saw Billie in her brother-in-law's apartment, where she was drinking enough booze to stun a horse and hoovering up vast quantities of cocaine. The next time he saw her was in a brothel in Harlem, doing exactly the same. Billie's greatest talent after singing was swearing. If she called you a motherfucker, it was just a compliment. We don't know the first time Billie called Jimmy a motherfucker, but she soon spotted this man who was hanging around, watching her, and she grew to like him. When Jimmy was sent to raid her, he knocked at the door pretending he had a telegram to deliver. Her biographers, Julia Blackburn and Donald Clark, studied the only remaining interview with Jimmy Fletcher, now lost by the archives handling it, and they wrote about what he remembered in detail. "Stick it under the door," she yelled. "It's too big to go under the door," he snapped back. She let him in. She was alone. Jimmy felt uncomfortable. "Billie, why don't you make a short case of this, and if you got anything, why don't you turn it over to us?" he asked. "Then he won't be searching around, pulling out your clothes and everything, so why don't you do that?" But Jimmy's partner arrived and sent for a policewoman to conduct the body search. "You don't have to do that. I'll strip," Billie said. "All I want to say is, will you search me and let me go?" "All that policewoman is going to do is look up my pussy." She stripped and stood there, and then she pissed in front of them, defying them to watch. The morning he first raided her, Jimmy took Billie to one side and promised to talk to Anslinger personally for her. Quote, "I don't want you to lose your job," he said. Not long after, he ran into her in a bar, and they talked for hours with her pet chihuahua Moochie by her side. Then one night at Club Ebony, they ended up dancing together, Billie Holiday and Anslinger's agent swaying together to the music. Quote, "And I had so many close conversations with her about so many things," he would remember years later. "She was a type who would make anyone sympathetic because she was the loving type." The man Anslinger sent to track and bust Billie Holiday had, it seems, fallen in love with her. Anslinger was going to be given a break on Billie, one he got nowhere else in the jazz world. Billie had got used to turning up at gigs so badly beaten by her husband, manager, and sometimes pimp, Louis McKay, they had to tape up her ribs before pushing her on stage. She was too afraid to go to the police, but finally she was brave enough to cut him off. Quote, "How come I got to take this from this bitch here? This low-class bitch," McKay raged, according to an interviewer who spoke with him years after Billie's death. "If I got a whore, I got some money from her, or I don't have nothing to do with this bitch." He had heard that Harry Anslinger wanted information on her, and he was intrigued. "She's been getting away with too much shit," McKay said, adding he wanted Holiday's ass in the gutter in the East River. That, it seems, was the clincher. "I got enough to finish her off," he had pledged. I'm going to do her up so goddamn bad. She's going to remember as long as she lives. He traveled to D.C. to see Harry, and he agreed to set her up. When Billie was busted again, she was put on trial. She stood before the court looking pale and stunned. It was called the United States of America versus Billie Holiday, she wrote in her memoir. And that's just the way it felt. She refused to weep on the stand. She told the judge she didn't want any sympathy. She just wanted to be sent to a hospital so she could kick the drugs and get well. Please, she said to the judge, I want the cure. She was sentenced instead to a year in West Virginia prison where she was forced to go cold turkey and work during the days in a pigsty, among other places. In all her time behind bars, she did not sing a note. Years later, when her autobiography was published, Billie tracked Jimmy Fletcher down and sent him a signed copy. She had written inside it, most federal agents are nice people. They've got a dirty job to do, and they have to do it. Some of the nicer ones have feelings enough to hate themselves sometime for what they have to do. Maybe they would have been kinder to me if they'd been nasty. Then I wouldn't have trusted them enough to believe what they told me. She was right. Jimmy told the writer Linda Cool that he never stopped feeling guilty for what he'd done to Lady Day. Quote, Billie paid her debt to society, one of her friends wrote, but society never paid its debt to her. Now, as a former convict, she was stripped of her cabaret performer's license on the grounds that listening to her might harm the morals of the public. This meant she wasn't allowed to sing anywhere that alcohol was served, which included all the jazz clubs in the U.S. One day, Harry Anslinger was told that there were also white women just as famous as Billie who had drug problems, but he responded to them rather indifferently. He called Judy Garland, another heroin addict, in to see him. They had a friendly chat in which he advised her to take longer vacations between pictures, and he wrote to her studio, assuring them she didn't have a drug problem at all. When he discovered that a Washington Society hostess he knew, a beautiful, gracious lady, he noted had an illegal drug addiction, he explained he couldn't possibly arrest her because it would destroy the unblemished reputation of one of the nation's most honored families. He helped her to wean herself off her addiction slowly without the law becoming involved. Harry told the public that the increase in drug addiction is practically 100% among Negro people, which he stressed was terrifying because already the Negro population accounts for 10% of the total population, but 60% of the addicts. He could wage the drug war. He could do what he did only because he was responding to a fear in the American people. You could be a great surfer, but you still need a great wave. Harry's wave came in the form of a race panic. In the run-up to the passing of the Harrison Act in 1914, the law that first criminalized drugs in the United States, the New York Times ran a story typical of the time. The headline was, Negro Cocaine Fiends New Southern Menace. It described a North Carolina police chief who was informed that a hitherto inoffensive Negro with whom he was well acquainted was running amok in a cocaine frenzy and had attempted to stab a storekeeper. Knowing he must kill this man or be killed himself, the chief drew his revolver, placed the muzzle over the Negro's heart, and fired, intending to kill him right quick, as the officer tells it, but the shot did not even stagger the man. Cocaine was, it was widely claimed in the press at the time, turning blacks into superhuman hulks who could take bullets to the heart without flinching. It was the official reason why some police in the South increased the caliber of their guns. One medical expert put it bluntly, the cocaine nigga, he warned, sure is hard to kill. Harry Anslinger did not create these underlying trends. His genius wasn't for invention. It was for presenting his agents as the hand that would steady all these cultural tremblings. He knew that to secure his bureau's future, he needed a high-profile victory over intoxication and over black people, and so he turned back to Billie Holiday. To finish her off, he called for his toughest agent, a man who was at no risk of falling in love with her or anyone else. The Japanese man couldn't breathe. Colonel George White, a vastly obese white slab of a man, had his hands tightened around his throat, and he was not letting go. It was the last thing the Japanese man ever saw. Once it was all over, White told the authorities he strangled this Jap because he believed he was a spy. But privately, he told his friends he didn't really know if his victim was a spy at all, and he didn't care. Quote, I have a lot of friends who were murderers, he bragged years later, and I had very good times in their company. He boasted to his friends that he kept a photo of the man he had throttled hanging on the wall of his apartment, always watching him. So he got to work on Billie. Colonel White was watched by his last victim, and this made him happy. White was Harry Anslinger's favorite agent, and when he looked over Holliday's files, he declared her to be a very attractive customer because the Bureau was at a loose end and could do with the opportunity to kick her over. White had been a journalist in San Francisco in the 30s until he applied to join the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. The personality test given to all applicants on Anslinger's orders found that he was a sadist. He quickly rose to the Bureau's ranks. He became a sensation as the first and only white man ever to infiltrate a Chinese drug gang, and he even learned to speak in Mandarin so he could chant their oaths with them. In his downtime, he would go swimming in the filthy waters of New York City's Hudson River, as if daring it to poison him. He was especially angry that this Black woman didn't know her place. Quote, she flaunted her way of living with her fancy coats and fancy automobiles and her jewelry and her gowns, he complained. She was the big lady wherever she went, close quote. When he came for her on a rainy day at the Mark Twain Hotel in San Francisco without a search warrant, Billie was sitting in white silk pajamas in her room. This was one of the few places she could still perform, and she badly needed the money. She insisted to the police that she had been clean for over a year. White's men declared they had found opium stashed in a wastepaper basket next to a side room and in the kit for shooting heroin in the room. And they charged her with possession. But when the details were looked at later, there seemed to be something odd. A wastepaper basket seems an implorable place to keep a stash, and the kit for shooting heroin was never entered into evidence by the cops. They said they left it at the scene. When journalists asked White about this, he blustered. His reply, they noted, appeared a little defensive. That night, White came to Billie's show at the Cafe Society uptown, and he requested his favorite songs. She never lost faith in her music's ability to capture and persuade. They'll remember me, she told a friend, when all this is gone and they finish badgering me. George White did not agree. Quote, I did not think much of Miss Holliday's performance, close quote, he told her manager sternly. Billie insisted the junk had been planted in her room by White, and she immediately offered to go into a clinic to be monitored. She would experience no withdrawal symptoms, she said, and that would prove she was clean and being framed. She checked herself in at a cost of $1,000, and according to Ken Bell's book, Lady Day's Diary, she didn't so much as shiver. We do know that George White had a long history of planting drugs on women. He was fond of pretending to be an artist and luring women to an apartment in Greenwich Village where he would spike their drinks with LSD to see what would happen. One of his victims was a young actress who happened to live in his building, while another was a pretty blonde waitress at a bar. After she failed to show any sexual interest in him, he drugged her to see if that would change. I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, White boasted after he had retired from the Bureau. Quote, where else but in the Bureau of Narcotics could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage within the sanction and blessing of the all-highest, close quote. He may well have been high when he busted Billie for getting high. The prosecution of Billie went ahead. The hounding and the pressure drove me, she wrote, to think of trying the final solution, death. Her best friend said it caused Billie enough anxiety to kill a horse. At the trial, a jury of 12 ordinary citizens heard all the evidence. They sided with Billie against Anslinger and White and found her not guilty. Nonetheless, she had slipped from the peak of her frame, Harry Anslinger wrote. Her voice was cracking. In the years after Billie's trial, many other singers were too afraid of being harassed by the authorities to perform Strange Fruit. But Billie Holiday refused to stop. No matter what they did to her, she sang her song. She was, her friend Annie Ross told me, as strong as she could be. When Billie was 44 years old, a young musician named Frankie Freedom was serving her a bowl of oatmeal and custard in his apartment when she suddenly collapsed. She was taken to the Knickerbocker Hospital in Manhattan and made to wait for an hour and a half on a stretcher. And they said she was a drug addict and turned her away. One of the ambulance drivers recognized her, so she ended up in a public ward of New York City's Metropolitan Hospital. As soon as they took her off oxygen, she lit a cigarette. Quote, "Some damn body is always trying to embalm me," she said, but the doctors came back and explained she had an array of very serious illnesses. She was emaciated because she had not been eating. She had cirrhosis of the liver because of a chronic drinking. She had cardiac and respiratory problems due to chronic smoking. And she had several leg ulcers caused by starting to inject street heroin once again. They said she was unlikely to survive for long. But Harry was not done with her yet. Quote, "You watch, baby," close quote. Billie warned from her tiny gray hospital room. Quote, "They are going to arrest me in this damn bed," close quote. Narcotics agents were sent to her hospital bed and said they had found less than 1/8 of an ounce of heroin in a tinfoil envelope. They claimed it was hanging on a nail on the wall 6 feet from the bottom of her bed, a spot Billie was incapable of reaching. They summoned a grand jury to indict her, telling her that unless she disclosed her dealer, they would take her straight to prison. They confiscated her comic books, radio, record player, flowers, chocolates, and magazines, handcuffed her to the bed, and stationed 2 policemen at the door. They had orders to forbid any visitors from coming in without a written permit, and her friends were told there was no way to see her. Her friend Maylie Duffy screamed at them that it was against the law to arrest somebody who was on the critical list. They explained that the problem had been solved. They had taken her off the critical list. So now, on top of the cirrhosis of the liver, Billie went into heroin withdrawal alone. A doctor was brought into the hospital at the insistence of her friends to prescribe methadone. She was given it for 10 days and began to recover. She put on weight and looked better. But then the methadone was suddenly stopped, and she began to sicken again. When finally a friend was allowed in to see her, Billie told her in a panic, "They're going to kill me. They're going to kill me in there. Don't let them." The police threw the friend out. Quote, "I had very high hopes that she would be able to come out of it alive," another friend, Alice Verbsky, told the BBC, until all this happened. Quote, "It was the last straw." On the street outside the hospital, protesters gathered, led by a Harlem pastor named the Reverend Eugene Callender. They held up signs reading, "Let Lady Live." Callender had built a clinic for heroin addicts in his church, and he pleaded for Billie to be allowed to go there to be nursed back to health. His reasoning was simple, he told me in 2013. "Addicts," he said, "are human beings just like you and me. Punishment makes them sicker. Compassion can make them well." Harry and his men refused. They fingerprinted Billie on her hospital bed. They took a mugshot of her on her hospital bed. They grilled her on her hospital bed without letting her talk to a lawyer. Billie didn't blame Anslinger's agents as individuals. She blamed the drug war itself because it forced the police to treat ill people like criminals. Imagine if the government chased sick people with diabetes, put a tax on insulin, and drove it into the black market, told doctors they couldn't treat them, she wrote in her memoir, then sent them to jail. If we did that, everyone would know we were crazy. Yet we do practically the same thing every day in the week to sick people hooked on drugs. Still, some part of Billie Holiday believes she had done something evil with her drug use and with her life. She told people she would rather die than go back to prison, but she was terrified that she would burn in hell, just as her mother had said she would all those years before when she was a little girl lying on the brothel floor, listening to Louis Armstrong's music and letting it carry her out of Baltimore. She was exhausted, one of her friends told me. She didn't want to go through it no more. And so, when she died on this bed, with police officers at the door to protect the public from her, she looked, as another of her friends told the BBC, as if she had been torn from life violently. She had 15 $50 bills strapped to her leg. It was all she had left. She was intending to give it to the nurses who had looked after her to thank them. Her best friend, Mary Duffy, insisted to anyone who would listen that Billie had been effectively murdered by a conspiracy to break her orchestrated by the narcotics police. But what could she do? At Billie's funeral, there were swarms of police cars because they feared their action against her would trigger a riot. In his eulogy for her, the Reverend Eugene Callender told me he had said, quote, "We should not be here. This young lady was gifted by her creator with tremendous talent. She should have lived to be at least 80 years old." The Federal Bureau of Narcotics saw it differently. Quote, "For her," Harry wrote with satisfaction, "there would be no more good morning heartache." This article is an adapted excerpt from Johann Hari's book, Chasing the Scream, the first and last days of the war on drugs. I will share it with you. In the chat. What's up, Josh? Thank you for joining the live at 400 years, or thank you for joining the live. Oh, Lord. This is why a calculation of the war on drugs is included in my demand for reparations. With that said, family, I want to thank you so much for being with me, for allowing me to share. I know that was long, but worth it. It was longer for Billie Holiday and the ancestors, so it's nothing for me to have the creature comforts of being in my home reading to you, something I really enjoy doing, because they paid the price that I may have this privilege. So I take every license to read and do my thing. Yes, I do. You're welcome, Mike Michelson. Thank you for reading that. You're so welcome. It was a privilege to read it. It's powerful. I'm back on Sunday, family. 6 o'clock seems to be a pretty good window where I'm not racing to get behind the camera. So join me for another amazing time learning about the reparations fight and why we should weaponize our vote and socialize our suffering. I am recommending that we do nothing more than what Dr. Charles Morris, pastor of Abyssinian Church, recommended after delivering Teddy Roosevelt the vote. He dishonorably discharged 167 of our Buffalo soldiers who were wrongfully accused of murdering a second white man after being quarantined in their barracks after being accused of murdering the first. He told the people and the administration that you shot us when our guns were empty, and for that, we're going to return the same with a blue top and a red Congress to protect the Black South. That was when we were Republicans. All I'm suggesting is that we do the same and shut this government down until we can raise enough money through the Equity Advocates PAC to replace the lames. A red top and a blue Congress to protect the over 53% of American descendants of chattel slavery who rely on government assistance by design of institutional systemic racism. We need to have that be as routine as showing up to the polls as the sheeple we've been since FDR to vote blue no matter damn who. That's what we need to be on. Yes, run it into the ditch. I'm not going to sit up here and mince words. The ADOS movement failed this mission epically by encouraging us to vote down ballot, but it confused so many people because they thought voting Democratic down ballot meant the top and the Congress. I am coming to you straight, no chaser. I will be voting red top and blue Congress until we've got enough momentum and enough money to replace the lames with full-chested reparationists. So I'm not mincing words. I've got to give 4 years to get some momentum behind this. And that's what this show is for, to teach you about what you're owed in the trillions over multi-generations and what we must do to not just survive, but to thrive and to finally be American. We don't get there with the only commodity we've got by continue to award the Democrats, who 6 of which just told you no to a $15 an hour minimum wage when the median income, the median house in this country costs $340,000. Okay. So with that said, family, let me pray us out. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever ADOS and its allies are, freedmen and women and their allies are, God truly is. Why? Because you are the face of God. You are the voice of God. You are the body temple of the Spirit of the living God. With that said, family, you go out here in these streets and you show this world who you really are. You make it a beautiful God-inspired rest of your evening and weekend until Sunday. I'm going to close us out with Strange Fruit, the very song that made Billie Holiday not just an extraordinary vocalist, but the mother of the civil rights movement. Ciao for now. Sharing the screen. Just a second, family. I'm going to put the Bluetooth on. It can be so low sometimes. Hold on. I'll do this with through my Bluetooth speaker. Just a second, family. Stand by. Make sure you can see her. Beautiful.
Some trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves, and blood of the root. Black bodies swinging in the summer breeze. Strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South. The bulging eyes and the twisted mouth. Scent of magnolia, sweet and fresh. Then a sudden smell of burning flesh. Here's a fruit for the crows to pluck. for the rain together, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rock, for the tree to drop. Here is a strange and bitter cry.